Is great to see each and every one of you today. Thank you again for being here. I know, number one, it's Monday, and it's Monday night, and it's always hard to do anything on a Monday, so I appreciate you doing that. Also, I know some of you are still locked in the world of chemistry or psychology, one of those two, and so I know that your brains are also fried. So I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate you taking the energy. I hope that you find your time useful here. Just again to remind us. Now, it was really fun because I saw a few of you going into your AP chemistry exam today, and it was nice because you were there at 7:30 in the morning. You were there at 7:30. I know you were because I was there at 7:30, giving people high fives. Don't forget, on May 17th, which is a week from Thursday, you are also going to be coming to school at 7:30 a.m. I know it's late start, but it's late start for everybody else, not you. You're going to be here at 7:30. I will be there to high five you and say, woohoo, you got this, you can do this. As long as I'm healthy and I don't break myself trying to exercise. I will be there in that morning. Remember, get there at 7:30. Bring a couple of things. Bring 2 pencils at least. Number 2, pencils. Bring 2 black pens. Make sure you bring black pens. And don't forget to bring a little snack, something protein-enriched. Hot Cheetos do not count. Then also, once you get there at 7:30, as some of you experienced today, you're going to be doing a lot of bubbling in. You're going to be bubbling in a bunch of different things. Ask them if they have my instructor ID number. If they don't, that's okay. If they do, please put mine. For those of you that have Miss Jacobson, see if they have hers as well, and then you can also bubble in hers. Well, not both. Choose one. Whoever you took class from. Don't play any funny games with that. All right, I took Oppenheimer. Put Jacobson. So mess with his scores. Do that. So just know that when you show up, you will have to do some of that, which is why it's important to be there at 7:30 a.m. bright and early. Don't forget the night before, sleep. Stop your studying the night before at 8, 9, and then go to bed. 10, I wouldn't recommend. The sooner you can stop, the sooner your brain is going to shut off. You'll sleep. You wake up in the morning. You say, Mommy, I love you. Can you make me a really good breakfast today? And she'll say, no. And you say, okay, I'll make it myself. But you still make yourself a really good breakfast. Make sure your stomach is full of protein, something good, and get ready for it. When you then get to the actual exam, they are going to start you off with multiple choice. It will be 55 stimulus-based multiple choice questions in 55 minutes. And we've already talked about that. Then you will then go straight into a 40-minute session where you will be answering 3 short answer questions. The first 2 are going to be stimulus-based. This is actually something new that I read today. The first 2 are going to be stimulus-based, which means we'll have some sort of document for you to refer to. The third one that you write, you have a choice between 2 prompts, but they will not give you a stimulus. So you choose which one you want to write about. Does that make sense? Then you're going to take a break. You're not going to talk to each other about any of the questions or anything. You're going to make sure that you don't do that, because if you do, they may just disregard your scores, and then parents or you have paid $98 for nothing. You're then going to come back, and they're going to slap an essay section on your desk. You will have 100 minutes to complete the essay portion. It is expected that you spend 60 minutes doing your document-based question, and then 40 minutes writing your actual long essay as well. So you have 100 minutes. They will start out and tell you, you may now begin the reading period. If you don't want to start with the DBQ, you don't have to. I suggest it. It usually takes more time. So you do your DBQ, then you move right on to your long essay question, and then by that point, you're probably feeling pretty sick, so you should probably get a doctor's note or a parent's note, and you should probably go home. Which, of course, a bunch of you did during or after chemistry today, which is completely understandable. There's nothing like, I didn't want you in class anyway, because you like titrated or whatever they call it. I don't even know what that means.
Titration?
Yeah. What? Who? Yes, Mr. Spradlin. So it's a 3.5 hour or 3 hour and 15-minute test. For all intents and purposes, 3.5 hours. So it'll probably be around noon. going to third period is almost right after. So you're probably going to feel pretty sick. Probably feel pretty sick. Okay. So, anyway, any questions on the day of? Please do not forget. Please do not forget, because you're checking Snapchat. How'd you know? Please do not forget 2 pencils and 2 black pens. Please do not forget that. Cool? What? Because you're going to do the multiple choice in pencil, and you're going to do the essay in pen. Because some students don't write dark enough with pencil, and so AP readers are literally like holding it up to the. If they can't read it, then you don't get a score, and they'll just give you 0 on it. So they say write it in black pen. If your handwriting is really bad, you should fix it. Yes, Isai. Okay. This is, I don't know this stretch yet. I don't know this one. Is it like the nay or whatever it is? I don't know. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's go through our multiple choice. Today is going to be on the modern era. Now remember, when you are attacking the multiple choice questions, you want to read the questions before you look at the documents. And again, listen, if you wanna socialize, I'm gonna ask that you just go home. It's okay. I won't take it personally. But if you'd rather socialize, like if you're at the back table and you'd rather socialize, then just go home. That's okay. I won't take it personally. But we got to respect everybody and want to make sure everybody can hear. So, as you go through the multiple choice questions, it's important for you to read the questions first, then look at the stimulus. Also, don't forget, use the stimulus as just that. Don't look for the exact answer in every single image or document, or you are going to be going crazy. Remember, it's just supposed to help you say, oh yeah, I remember that. So, for example, when you get to one of these images, and you see a smokestack and a machine, and you see 1750, you should say, industrialization. Right? So you're like, nope. Yep. So that's what you want to start thinking. So again, it's just supposed to stimulate you and say, okay, what do I remember about industrialization? Once you get to the question, we want to then go to the best of the Gothic poets, Edgar Allan Poe. You want to do process of elimination. And so go through what you know it cannot be for sure. Because usually there's one that it definitely can't be. Usually there's another one that's, probably not. It'd be a long shot. And then there are 2 where, shoot, it's 50-50. And so that's okay, but you want to try to get it to those 2. So let's go through number 1. Tolly, you're super tired after AP Psychology and a DBQ today because she also took her test from Friday because she was busy mock trialing all weekend. So Tolly, you are probably a bundle of energy right now. So get your energy out by reading question number 1 and telling us what it cannot be. Because she's awesome and she can handle it. Great. What can it not be? Why not? Yeah, what's a post-industrial economy? Internet. Which is actually true. The internet is a post-industrial. We don't manufacture things, and we don't manufacture as many things in the United States anymore because we're a service economy. We create apps to do everything instead of producing actual goods. But we did not learn that yet. You are 100% correct. And so it's not going to be A. Good. What else can it not be, Jack? Why not? Actually, no. There are 2 industrial revolutions, but there are actually 4. We're in the 4th, apparently. That's what NPR told me the other day because I'm so pretentious. But anyway, the second industrial revolution is something that happens in the 1850s. It's when there are chemicals and electricity and all those things are getting developed. But, Jack, that's still not the answer. It's still not the answer. So it's not the first to the second because the second Doesn't happen until about 1850, 1860, and it certainly is not going to have animal power in it. So good. What else can it not be? Yeah, why not? I love that. It's not D because I don't know what that is. Good. That's good. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's two things here. You have the guild system manufacturing. Listen. To everybody's favorite system because it makes them giggle, the putting out system. Now, the putting. What this means is that Anna, really, Anna. What the guild system is the carryover from the Middle Ages in cities and with manufacturing and professional artisan groups. They would have guilds. It's not a perfect comparison, but guilds are kind of like medieval labor unions. They set regulations for people being able to enter into a field, expectations for your skill level and ability. They would set prices and do things like that. A guild was a way of protecting each artisan group's jobs. And so, if you wanted to be a carpenter in a city, say Paris, you would have to enter the Carpenters Guild. You'd enter in as an apprentice. Only after you proved yourself could you be a journeyman, and then only after you've proved yourself as a journeyman can you then become a master craftsman, and then it isn't until you become a really good master craftsman that you start getting larger and larger projects. But the guilds are going to regulate how much you are able to do in that. That's the guild system. The putting out system is also known as its kind of less slightly inappropriate term, the cottage system. What the putting out system is actually as particularly cotton textile manufacturers in cities began to realize that, shoot, guild people are super expensive. You know who's not expensive? Peasant women. And peasant women would start to buy those spinning wheels. Remember Sleeping Beauty? Right? So they would buy their own spinning wheels and they would bring them into their own homes. Literally into their, well, they only really have one room. Into their homes, and they would work through the night and spin cloth and sell it piecemeal. They would sell however many they were able to produce. And so cotton manufacturers and textile sellers in cities were actually buying their cloth from peasant women outside of cities because they were cheaper than hiring cloth makers in cities. Does that make sense? It's actually the start of part of the Industrial Revolution because it's then going to go from women individually owning those spinning wheels to wealthy bourgeois buying a bunch of spinning wheels, setting up factories, and then hiring those women to work. Do my hand motions really help? I've been told they really help. Okay, so it is not D. It is not D. So therefore, the answer is, in fact, B. The answer is B. Go ahead. What's up? Because it's showing you that transition. No, here, Connie, it's a great question. You're not the only one. Because look, it's not like it's only animal power and only industry. It's a mixture of both, so it's showing that gradual transition from one to the other. Well, and what they're saying is that there are still some animals, but they're transitioning. Right? I have no analogy that I can think of right now. I'm sorry. Usually I'm pretty good at just, maybe not. That's also now recorded, Emma. And now I'll never forget that. Okay, so good. Number 2, Emma, take it away. Yes. Good. Which is it not? Why not? Very good. It is irrelevant. Also, and this was, by the way, a question that, Emma, you actually brought up. I'm sorry, not Emma, the student who was just reading it. Because this is being filmed. So, when they say in the image, they're also still referring to image 1. And so image 1 is circa 1750. Germany's not going to unify till the 1860s, something like that. So it's not going to be till about 100 years after that, a little bit over 100 years after that. In addition, and Jack, this goes back to your point, Germany is going to be the leader of the second industrial revolution. And so it's not until a later process that you see that happening. So it can't be D, you are right. What else can it not be? Why not? It is not an immediate effect. That's good. Also, how often do Europeans, as they go to places like India and Africa, say, here's all our machines? They don't. And they do in some places. So in some places, they absolutely do. South Africa, Australia, they're going to become industrialized. But a majority of the colonies are not going to undergo a large-scale industrialization. Why? Why not? That's actually very true. But also, what are they getting the colonies for? Resources, cheap labor, new markets. They don't want competition. They want somebody to give them cheap stuff and to buy their stuff. Make sense? Good. So it can't be that. What else can it not be? Why not A? Yeah, and I don't know that it's an immediate process. And why is it not immediate? Say it again. Oh, Mr. Pruz, yes, say it again. Europe has an abundance of fossil fuels, particularly England, but all over the continent. Coal was plentiful. So it is not an immediate cause because they're not going to run out yet. Does that make sense? Jack? Okay.
Obviously, yes, Asian countries do lose some share, but how much share do they lose until the opium wars? In a place like China, they don't. I mean, it takes wars and literally just killing people to lose their share.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I don't like this question. And for that exact reason, Jack. I'm not sure, because that really depends on where you're talking. I would imagine in Asia, the share of import, I don't know that European imports were necessarily getting there. So my thought is they probably meant to say in Europe. They probably meant to say in Europe, and that would have made C definitely the choice. Definitely the choice. Because then they're going to, especially because Indian cotton textiles are one of the reasons why you see the mechanization of the cotton industry happening first. And so people are going to stop importing cotton from places like India or so from China because they're able to produce it in Europe. In fact, even porcelain is going to become a European product, especially Amsterdam, which is why when you go to Amsterdam now, one of the things that your family brings home is a nice little teacup with a bunch of things, and it's actually part of our China set at home. Really cool, actually. They have some really cool, famous artist paintings on them. I really like them, like Girl with the Pearl Earring. Nice. Anyway, that's just me, I guess. Good. So the answer is in fact C, which I can't highlight there. Good. Number 3. Min, go for it. Nice. So which can it not be? Why not A? Yeah, and can we talk about, from the working conditions, why would we talk about which power source we should be using? Does that make sense? You're right, man. The image doesn't really show anything about that, and particularly not the working conditions. That's good. Okay, what else can it not be? Don't everybody volunteer at once. And for number 3, just A. Thank you for asking that, though. Why not? Cause what? That's hysterical. Now, let's not say that you didn't learn anything in Mr. Gettler's class. What is one of the effects of industrialization? Yeah, but I don't think this shows anything to do with that. If it was an image of one of my favorite events, the Great Stink of 18-something, 51, I think it's 51, the Great Stink of 1851, or it was a political cartoon of the River Thames introducing his children, one of which is cholera, then maybe you could say environmental regulations. But Jake is right in saying, because, like, what? So, good. What else can it not be? Jack, why not? Yeah, and I don't know. First of all, so this is kind of advanced. Number one, Jack, you're right. Yeah. No, that's not really something that they're trying to say. In addition, it's in Western France, and they're not Protestant, so that would be Catholic. But you're not expected to know that for AP World, AP Euro next year. Yeah, you'll be expected to know that. But no, you're doing that, Emma. Oh, and you know what? What a great question, because the answer is, in fact, C. And again, I didn't like the previous question, and I don't like this one, because these working conditions, I mean, that guy kind of looks like he's having fun. Little kids. But where are little kids? No. Like, these ladies, I mean, she's just like mopping. It doesn't look that bad. I don't know. Like, I don't see somebody losing a limb. I don't know. And Ava, that brings up the point, though, because what are they truly testing you on here? Yeah, your knowledge of what's happening at this point in time. I mean, what? Okay. So they're just saying, do you remember things about the Industrial Revolution? Cool? Great! The answer is, in fact, C. Mr. Marchetti, why don't you take number 4? Max. Dominic, you there? Do you want me to have Connie do it? Okay, Connie, go. But Dominic will tell you which one it's not. You just read the question. It's not A. Nicely done, Dominic, without any help. And why, Dominic? I don't know. Dominic, let me read A to you, and maybe you can tell me why it's wrong. Let's see. He's got this. Dominic, A says, working class families and bourgeois families generally had similar occupational patterns. That is certainly not true, Dominic. Yeah, got it. Dominic, maybe you got caught up on bourgeois without the C. So bourgeoisie, the middle class and the working class are certainly not going to do the same things. So it can't be A. What else can it not be? Why not C? The development of working class neighborhoods is characterized by unsanitary. Yeah, it doesn't really show it in the image. You're right. Is that true, though? Yeah, miserable. Tenement houses. Good. What else can it not be? Yeah, D, because can we see them improving the conditions of women labor? Yeah, no. So it has to therefore then be B. Within factories, skilled workers continue to be predominantly male, while women and children performed unskilled factory work. There's a man. That's a man. There's a child. Again, Alexi, I think it was you asking that. I don't know. I mean, this person in the side of the room that asked that question. Again, it is a stimulus-based question. They're testing your ways of the world knowledge. If you sat there looking at the image saying, you're just doing too much. So think about those patterns that you studied. Cool? All right. Ooh, I like this one. Let's do this one. I almost put this one on today's quiz, and then I didn't. Let's read this one from V.I. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Mr. Spradley, you want to take this one? Yeah, just a question. You don't have to read. You don't have to read the Lenin quote. Great. What can it not be? Oh, well, fair enough. I'm sorry, Mr. Spradley. I mean, person who was reading the question. Which one can it not be? Help him out. Why not A? Adam Smith? Now, Adam Smith, you know. So, Adam Smith, oh, perfect. It's right here. So, Adam Smith, and you'll all enjoy the song that I'll sing to you today. But Adam Smith is going to be the person who comes up with the idea of capitalism. John Stuart Mill is going to come up with the idea of economic liberalism. Now, liberalism does not mean the same thing that you think liberals mean. In fact, if you are a conservative, you are probably a classical liberal. Because a liberal is going to adhere to the ideas of Adam Smith, in particular the ideas of laissez-faire, which we'll get to later as we go, but it means let be. Oh, don't ruin my joke. We're getting there. So anyway, so that's economic liberalism. Again, that's probably more of an AP Euro term, but they might use that. Yes.
So did John
Stuart Mill?
John Stuart Mill and Adam Smith more or less advocate the same thing?
Well, Adam Smith is going to outline it. He's going to talk more about the ideas of market forces. He will also say things like governments will get in the way. And John Stuart Mill is going to be the champion of this idea in the 19th century, particularly as more places are industrializing and the choice is state-run, not state-run. He's going to say the best idea is laissez-faire. Does that make sense? Good question, though. Good question. And first of all, the reason that one's wrong is because it's not happening in European universities necessarily. In fact, it's happening at meeting houses. University students, but it's not like university faculty are saying John Stuart Mill is wrong. What else is not the answer? For 5. Yeah, why not B? Yeah, the desire to retain. Yeah, Lenin is not going to want to retain that. That is not what Lenin wants. Pre-industrial. No. Good. What else can it not be? Yeah, why not D? Yeah! And what's your joke that you always make?
Oh, what's the class that everyone hates?
Yeah, the bourgeoisie! I still don't know why that's a joke, but no, he says it. That's it. No. He just, all right. He's wearing his red shirt. I have suspicions. So, Red Scare. What you see there is, yeah, it's not going to be D, because again, Lenin as a socialist, dare I say communist, is certainly not going to want the expansion of the middle class in newly industrialized society. So, no. So the answer is going to be C, because communism is going to look at the Industrial Revolution and is going to say, you know what? This needs to be modified. This isn't being done right. I don't mean this in a bad way, but I'm sensing that you guys are ready to move on. Would you like to keep doing multiple choice, or would you want me to move on to just the lecture? Okay, if we're going to keep doing multiple choice, then let's keep the focus, okay? Okay, number 6. In the late, and I'll just read this one. Why not? But I'll tell, so you guys can tell me which ones it's not. In the late 19th and early 20th century, some governments responded to the growing popularity of ideas such as the ones expressed in the passage by doing which of the following? That is a wordy question. Ugh, it's like I wrote it. I didn't, but I'm wordy. Which one can it not be? What did governments not do? Why not D? Yeah, 100%. And what would that have to do with what Lenin is saying? Yeah, I don't think that has anything to do with what Lenin is saying. Plus, yeah, why do you want foreigners to do that? It's the exact opposite of that, actually. You want homegrown. Pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. This is nationalism, baby! Good. What else would they not have done? Why not? Yeah, exactly. And that I don't know that they would say like, boy, based off what Lenin is saying, let's get some colonies. Do they want to get some colonies? Yeah, sure, absolutely, but not in response to Lenin. Good. What else? Why not A? Yeah, that and the idea of transnational corporations isn't going to happen until after World War II. TNCs is going to be a post-World War II, postmodern globalization, internationalism invention. That's where you get your Dutch Shell. That's why there's McDonald's everywhere you go. That's a TNC. Or an MNC. They also call them multinational corporations. So yeah. So the answer is C. Passing reforms designed to improve the conditions of industrial workers. We know by 1902 especially that socialists had already been openly debating the impacts on on factory workers. And they are going to be outwardly speaking against this. You're going to see the organization of labor unions. And governments are going to respond in kind. Like the British, who stopped children from being able to work in coal mines because they don't care about the kids working at all. They just don't want them to be around naked women. Because the coal mines were so warm and hot and the work so grueling that women literally took their clothes off when they were working, as did men, and that was horrifying for the poor children. We don't care about them, like, sitting in a hole for hours on end and breathing in poisonous gases. No. It's nudity that's the problem. Good. And I think we're on number 7 now. Which of the following best describes the similarity between the Russian revolutions of 1917 and the Chinese Revolution of 1911? Ooh, what a fun one. Technically, it's a little bit past this. This would be the postmodern era, but it's fun. So let's do it. What can it not be? Yeah, why not A? That's true. Yeah, or they do, but they're a revolution against, like when France entered into Spain and there's a revolution. But yeah, you're right. It's not really initiated by that, and that doesn't. I mean, yeah. In China, are they invaded? Opium Wars? I don't know. But you're right. It doesn't start that. Good. What else? Oh. Come on, this is your chance to shine. Or fail. Come on, Mr. Cruz. What is it? What do we got? What is it not? All right, let's look at this. Both were led by members of the working classes who had risen through the ranks of labor unions. Ladies and gentlemen, since when has Joe the plumber ever started a revolution? Joe the plumber, no. Ladies and gentlemen, come on now. No. It's going to be radical members of the bourgeoisie. It's going to be Lenin. It's going to be Maoage. It's going to be individuals who are highly educated. Actually, Mao was a teacher. Mao was a teacher. And so it's only going to be members of the educated class that will be organizing this. Good. both gained support of government reformers holding high bureaucratic positions? In Russia? One of the most conservative European powers at that time, if not the most conservative. And then China, the Qing dynasty, trying to hold on to thousands of years of tradition? Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Nope. So then it's D. It's D. Now, why don't I like D? Why don't I like that answer? What word don't I like? Yeah, I don't know. I like ineffectiveness. Why is that wet? I don't like the word monarchy, and here's why. China is a monarchy, but it's also, I don't know. It's hard for me to completely define China as a monarchy, but it is under the control of a single, all-powerful, divinely ordained 9-year-old emperor named Pu Yi. Or if he was a 4-year-old or something like that, I think at that point, or 5, when he was deposed. But anyway, questions on multiple choice. Now, I'll give you the option. We can do some more, or I can move on. Move on? Okay. Why don't you guys take a minute, transition yourself. I'll transition, and then I'll drink some water, and then we'll get going. All right, I'd like you to be back in your seats in about 30 seconds. What about it? Yeah, I'm going to talk that it happened, yeah. Next week? Oh, no. I don't know why. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and here we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are in our second to last time period. Next week will be our last review session. Obviously, because I'm not going to hold one after the AP exam. That would be pointless. We are in our second to last, which means we are in the modern era. Just to give you a brief overview of world history, Alexi, don't do it. A brief overview of world history. We start our course really in the Paleolithic era, as humans spend a majority of their history as hunter-gatherers. Eventually, over time, because of the warming of the last ice age, and because human ingenuity and closeness to the environment, and perhaps just a food crisis, you see humans beginning to farm. And with the agricultural revolution, we see the birth of what we consider most recent human history. And that's going to be the Neolithic Revolution. And from about 10,000 BCE to 3,500 BCE, we start seeing just the gradual settling down of human societies. From 3,500 to about 600 BCE, we see our first civilizations. The first time that we see organized human societies with governments, with social structures, with economic structures, and even with religious structures as well. From 600 BCE to 600 CE, we see the fall of those first civilizations and the expansion of our classical empires that are going to expand their borders to encompass much of those major regions that we study today. And they are going to, through their expansion and through their unification of diverse peoples, are going to create kind of what makes each geographic feature unique, to develop those features that really makes you understand, oh, that's what Europe is. Oh, okay, that's East Asian. Oh, okay, that's South Asian. Then in the post-classical era, we see the classical eras falling and new empires emerging, both traditional agricultural and pastoral empires that are going to expand to even greater heights as the different regions of Afro-Eurasia and the Americas begin to bump elbows with each other and interact even more. And that is our time period of hemispheric integration. Okay. Last week, we then studied the early modern era. And as we looked at everybody's favorite event in history, because it's the one you come into this class already knowing, in 1492, Europeans then rediscover the Americas, rediscover the Americas with the sailing and voyages of Columbus, and then Europeans not only integrate the Americas, but they also smash their way into the Indian Ocean. It's the beginning and the development of Europeans playing a bigger role on the world stage. Now we enter into the modern era. And I'm not trying to be Eurocentric, because that's literally the opposite of what this class is intended to be. But one has to understand that the modern era, from 1750 to 1914, is Europe's second golden age. This is a time when it's pretty awesome to be a European, because Europeans are going to become the most advanced human society during this time, and they are going to come to dominate global affairs largely through the development of what we are going to call modernity. Europe is going to define what it means to be modern, because everybody wants to be totally #mod. So let's look at thank you for the support. Let's look at modernity. Let's first think about why, because it really doesn't make any sense. Because since the Roman Empire, Europe has largely been way behind both China and the Islamic empires. So how is it that Europe is really getting to this point? Well, the first is just, it happens to be geopolitical things. The fact that Europe has now developed into highly competitive, fragmented states means that each state is trying extremely hard to beat out the other. And this incredible level of competition is not something seen in the large, expansive empires of Islam or of the Ming and Qing dynasties. So it is something unique with Europe, particularly this incredible competition. Because of this competition, during the early modern era, monarchs, kings, queens, are going to have a special relationship with merchants, where they are going to be sponsoring economic innovations in order to gain a larger piece of what they considered the finite wealth of the world. Thirdly, Europe actually goes through a scientific revolution, where they begin to make incredible progress in understanding the natural world. Monarchs are again going to support this, particularly places like Britain, and they're even going to hold and sponsor competitions, friendly competitions for who can innovate the absolute most and give cash prizes and wealth and prestige to those who can. And so Europeans actually are going through a process of innovation. And because of their incredible competition, they're trying to beat each other. This is going to mix to create the developments that we see happening during the modern era. And the two things that really mark a modern society, at least as Europe comes to define it, are number one, the development and application of Enlightenment values. The Enlightenment is a social and philosophical movement where thinkers, philosophers are going to take the ideas of the scientific revolution. This idea that if we just observe, collect enough data, we can figure out how systems work and continuously manipulate and improve them to make a perfect society. So Enlightenment philosophers were looking at the European social system and saying, number one, is this natural and is this logical? And then number two, they were looking at government systems and saying the same thing. Is that natural and is that logical? And they're going to start to challenge those things and envision this greater society. In general, Enlightenment values is going Enlightenment values call for a more democratized society. They call for this idea that tends to make its way in AP documents called a popular sovereignty. Where true power or sovereignty should be held in the people, not their governments. And governments should not try to take power away from people. In fact, they should protect things like speech, property, and other things, and other natural rights, liberty, I guess, the freedom to choose, instead of trying to take them away. To try to have more people participating in the governing process. This also is seen in the idea that they believe that all men, sorry ladies, are created equally. So equality is one of those Enlightenment values. The second thing that we are going to see that defines a modern society is, of course, industrialization. As Europe in 1750, it starts in England, and I think I have a whole other slide on that, is going to begin to shift the way that it produces goods. It's going to shift from a largely agriculturally based economy to an economy that depends on the mass production of products, of goods, using machines instead of handicrafts. Does that make sense? So that's going to be a modern society. And like I said, it happens in Europe. It's a weird anomaly because in a lot of ways you would expect an industrial revolution or a time of enlightenment to occur in a place like China or Islam. But it does happen in Europe. Before we let Europeans give themselves a good, pat on the back, let's not forget that in the post-classical era, Islam had a complete flowering of culture and education and science, and it was Islam that largely was responsible for furthering mathematics and scientific discoveries and medical discoveries as well. If Europeans hadn't increased their participation with the outside world during the early modern era, they'd probably still be slapping their own behinds or trying to figure that out. But let's get back to the modern era, shall we? Nice graphic, Mr. Offset. Oh, that's so cool. It makes me think. Okay, so we see, first things first, when we see the kickoff of the modern era, there are a few revolutions that we see happening. And the first revolutions that I want to talk about are those of democracy. Because we're going to see the growth and expansion of popular sovereignty in Europe. I mean, people are going to finally have a voice in their governments. Well, not really. They're going to kind of do that. So we see these revolutions. And so we start with the revolution in the United States. Of course, it's not really a revolution. It's more of a war of independence, where wealthy white males are going to kick out the other wealthy white males so that they can maintain power in what is now going to be called the United States. They are considered kind of middle-class individuals, so it's a kind of a revolution, but really it's a war for independence. We'll get to it. The French Revolution is probably the big one in Europe, of course. The French Revolution, where the people of France, the bourgeoisie especially, are going to lead a popular revolt against the nobility, against the clergy, and of course against Louis and Marie Antoinette, cutting off their heads and trying to create a republic and then a true democracy for the first time, declaring everybody equal and dramatically shifting all of the things that define France up until this point. Until they go too far and they start cutting each other's heads off, which then causes what's called the Reign of Terror, which has an incredible amount of people being killed, and largely the revolution starts literally eating itself alive from the inside. Until it is saved by a normal stature, not short, general of the revolution by the name of Napoleon, who is going to, of course, further the democracy of the French Revolution, spread Enlightenment ideals, and crown himself Emperor of Europe.
Crown himself Emperor of Europe?
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Andy, for laughing. Because, of course, as we see Napoleon is going to spread Enlightenment values, but Napoleon is also going to make himself a king. And so you can't really be a king and democratic. Oh, wait, no, but he did allow them to vote. He did give them a plebiscite. vote for who you want, and Napoleon was the only name. And they didn't really count it, they just gave it to him. But his mother didn't attend the ceremony, and it's really bad. So anyway, you then have with Napoleon beginning to cause havoc. Well, actually, with the French Revolution causing havoc in France, and the French Revolution government declaring slavery illegal, you see a French colony in the Americas. Haiti, also having a revolution. Now, this was the only true successful slave revolt in history. And in Haiti, you have the slaves uniting behind a voodoo priestess who just called for them in a drugged out trance to then go kill their masters. And they literally just do that. They go, they run, they kill their masters. There's a huge revolution. And then eventually they have to kick out pretty much everybody because the English come and the French come and then everybody. But anyway, what winds up happening in the Haitian Revolution is the creation of the first ever Black Republic. And so Haiti is actually an example of a somewhat successful revolution as they do create a democracy afterwards. And then, of course, you also have the Latin American wars for independence or revolutions, kicking both the Spanish and the Portuguese out and creating an independent Latin America. Again, it happens all over the Americas. It happens in Mexico with the Grito de Dolores of Miguel Hidalgo, and it has also the South American Revolution led by José de San Martín and Simón Bolívar. And Simón Bolívar is this strapping, wonderfully sideburn gentleman right here with his hair blowing in the wind. Good thing it's blowing that way and not the other way, because it would make his hair look way more receding if it was going the other way. So then you say, so what? What matters with these revolutions? What is it that you should really get? Well, number one is it really benefits the middle class. And this era, the modern era, is going to be the era of the middle class. And it's important to understand that in all of these revolutions, they are both started by and mostly benefit the middle class. In France, it's led by the educated elite, the educated that are dripping with Enlightenment values, who want to kick out the nobility in order to gain more power for themselves. The people who actually even start the storming of the Bastille are the little artisans that are closest to it, who are tired of high bread prices. But it's the bourgeoisie who have been reading Enlightenment values that are going to revolt. In Latin America, it's the Creoles who want to kick out the Peninsulares. The Creoles, those individuals who are fully Spanish by blood, but were born in the Americas. They want to kick out those sent from the peninsula, from Portugal and from Spain, so that they can then control the mestizos, the mulattoes, and the natives in Latin America. And then the U.S., we already talked about a little bit. Number two is they're all inspired by Enlightenment values. And they challenge aristocracy. In some cases, they challenge religion. But in general, it's the challenging of traditions. Yes?
In the U.S., was it the gentlemen that did the revolution, or were those the...
It is the landed estates, the gentlemen, yes. Okay. And largely, again, the United States is kind of an interesting thing because really, seriously, not much changes. Because they started out already having self-government, they had local governors, they had local assemblies, they had local democratic institutions. Literally, they just got mad because the British started to actually pay attention. It's like you guys, when you're used to your parents letting you do whatever you want, and then all of a sudden, they're like, no, you have curfew because you got 1 C on that AP World History test. And you're like, stop putting me down! I'm independent! They didn't do anything right. So anyway. Oh, good. And in general too, it does create this expectation. Now, this is a pretty big one, because while the revolutions don't always necessarily make actual changes, you do see people's understanding of the role of government shift, which will eventually make more changes as we see other revolutions occurring, like revolutions in industry. So governments are responsible for the people, which means that by the end of the 19th century, most European at least, and then even most Latin American and places that were formerly controlled by Europe, are going to have at least the appearance of, and nominally, representative legislative bodies. What's a legislative body? Good thing I'm asking. Somebody say in the back? Yeah, what is that? Very good. Very good. That is true. What is legislation? Laws. So what does a legislative body do? They make laws. That's what a legislative body is. A legislative body is usually a group of individuals who are elected by the people who are responsible for making laws. Therefore, it is the people who are making the laws. And I don't know why I have that in quotes. Oh, here we go. Democratization. And so we see kind of the expansion of this idea of popular sovereignty, but it only goes so far. And you remember this from chapter 17 because Strayer writes about the Atlantic revolutions and their echoes. Because we see these ideas, the ideas that really are the first time that ideas are sparking something this violent and this massive of a shift. And we see them beginning to change certain things. And of course, the first is the abolition of slavery. Now, the abolition of slavery, yes, is going to be fought for by individuals who are A, religious, but also B, really looking at this idea, this Enlightenment idea of equality and questioning the very nature. But it's not until the Industrial Revolution truly makes slavery unnecessary that people are willing to get rid of it. And so you do see the abolition of slavery. The slave trade is abolished in 1811 by the British. By the way, a really fun name to drop for the abolition of slavery is William Wilberforce, which is a really fun name to say. William, I think you got that one. Wilberforce, like the pig, force. Wilberforce. He was a member of the British Parliament who fought tirelessly tirelessly in order to abolish the slave trade. It took him much of his career, I want to say something like 60 years, or some incredible amount of time, where he was advocating for the abolition of slavery, and it doesn't happen until towards the end of his career. So William Wilberforce. But the issue with the abolition of slavery is the fact that largely lives for former slaves don't change. In North America, in other places, you see slaves barely able to scrape by and forced into other types of coercive labor, possibly indentured servitude, possibly going into debt to either former landlords and or even the governments that help them. They're also in North America going to be living in lands of segregation with laws that still separate those who were former slaves and those who were not. And so, while the abolition of slavery is very much so a proponent of Enlightenment values, it also had its limit. Another way that you see the expansion of Enlightenment values is through the women's suffrage movement, which of course is not how much women suffer, but suffrage is the right to vote. And we see this occurring all across Europe especially, but even limited places in European colonies, where women are beginning to speak out to get the right to vote, to be able to participate within the political sphere. Because up until this point, the government, anything outside, particularly after the Industrial Revolution, the outside world of business and politics is messy and dirty. And men must protect women from this, because women are pure balls of light. They're angelic and perfect and dainty, fragile. And so they must be put on a pedestal far away for others to just observe for their angelic beauty.
No.
So that was the idea of the cult of domesticity, and women were actively trying to fight. But remember, it is actively fought against by men in society. And women do not get the right to vote until after World War II. And so despite the fact that you see some women beginning to speak out with groups like the Women's Social Political Union, National American Women's Suffrage Association, yeah, but what's the Women's Social and Political Union what's her name?
If it was a man, you would remember.
No, it's Millicent Fawcett. Millicent Fawcett, and then the suffragettes under the Pankhurst sisters. Pankhurst sister. I remember the Pankhurst. It's Millicent that I can't forget. How do I forget a name like Millicent? I don't know. Or like Fawcett. Oh, and then the last thing that you see democratization, and really this idea of popular sovereignty, is the idea of nationalism. Now, here's the way to understand how nationalism is an extension of Enlightenment values. If popular sovereignty is the true aim of governments, one has to define who the populace is. And so nationalism is a way of defining who that is. And usually it's along ethnic lines. Language, culture, traditions, customs. Many of you know that I live up in Solvang, which is basically one big Danish folktale by Hans Christian Andersen. Hans Christian Andersen is a product of nationalism because the Danes were trying to say, what does it mean to be Danish? Oh yeah, the Frozen. Which was inspired by the Ice Queen, which has nothing to do with Elsa and Anna. I read the story. It's scary and weird. But anyway, also The Little Mermaid was Hans Christian Andersen too. Also freaky, very freaky. I mean, we're talking like walking on razor blades and then dying as foam. All for the love of a man. Really? You don't need him, sister. Okay. So popular sovereignty, defining the nation. Oh, good. Here we go. So when we look at the second thing that defines a modern society, again, we have to ask, why Europe? Why is it Europe particularly that is going to be industrializing? Now, I talked a little bit about this, but in general, the reasons are as follows. The first is just plain geographic luck. Europe, had a wealth of fossil fuels, a wealth of resources that are going to make industrialization way easier. So not just coal, but also iron, things that are going to be the foundation building blocks of industrialization. Also, their location and the amount of waterways that they have. One of the reasons why England is the first to industrialize is because they're finding coal deposits right next to rivers. So you can ship coal easily across the country. We talked a little bit about their quote-unquote Europeanness, which is not a word, but their desire for competition, this competitive nature that some people attribute to European or Western peoples. Of course, there was also, like Jack mentioned earlier, there is a second agricultural revolution that occurs in England first, but also across the European continent, where Europeans begin to finally, after thousands of years, improve their agricultural techniques. They're going to be using different, and also inventing certain things that are going to make agricultural production more effective. And we know more food equals more people. And more people with less of a need to farm means you have a ready and willing labor force. Does that make sense? So you have a bunch of farmers who were at first working, or were ready to farm, but realized, I'm not needed. And so in search of figuring out what they need to do, they then go to cities and they find themselves working in factories. And then, of course, as Europe is going to, as Europe knows already, they had already had a great connection to their colonies. Now, when I say their colonies, I'm talking about the ones that had just gained independence from Europe in the Americas, and the ones that are in Asia. But they have those connections, which is going to give them another advantage. Let's just keep. Oh, there we go. Yeah. We're going on. What was that? Fifth? The fifth thing, again, is political support. Most European governments, and they were mostly monarchies at that point, most European governments have some sort of protection for private property. During the early modern era, you do see what are called enlightened despots. You don't really need to know this, but who are going to insert a little bit of Enlightenment values into their countries. One of the first things that they do is they create private property laws. If one has private property and patent laws, one's going to feel safer in inventing and trying new things because they can own that and profit off of it. And then lastly, and particularly in Britain, but also in other places, Europe had also developed a pretty stable and sophisticated banking system. The ability of storing wealth, generating wealth, and loaning out money for those who want to try new things. So why Britain? Now we talked again a little bit about this already. Geography I've already mentioned. Science and progress I talked about briefly. The British Royal Society was an organization that was sponsored by the British government that was encouraging science and innovation and even offering cash prizes for those who would win. Yes. British Royal Society, yeah. Or Academy, British Society or Academy, one of those. I think it's Society. Anyway, science and progress. Also, you do see in England, part of the extension of the Enlightenment was Adam Smith's ideas of capitalism. And it is because of Uncle Adam's wonderful song, and I'm going to sing it anyway just because I want to, which is laissez-faire, and it goes something like, laissez-faire, laissez-faire, laissez-faire. Don't roll your eyes at me, say, laissez-faire, whispered Uncle Adam, laissez-faire. I know. So I was in the honor choir in high school. It's not a big deal. I actually was, but really only because my siblings were before me, and the choir director was like, "All right, I'll take the third." But Adam Smith's idea of laissez-faire economics, where governments are going to largely be hands off. The British government really allowed industry to take off without any regulation, and it's because of this that there was so much progress that happened so quickly. Now, again, we'll talk about what the effects of that were, but that's neither here nor there. And then lastly, like we said, there was a ready labor force because of the agricultural revolution. And we've talked about political support. Oh, and the Bank of England. Let's not forget that England was one of the only places in Europe not affected physically by the Napoleonic Wars. While Britain is going to be heavily involved militarily, Napoleon never invades Britain. And so because of that, the Bank of England is largely untouched and is stable and is able to loan out money way better than many banks on the European mainland. So industrialization, very quickly. And then don't forget, too, it's on Neo. Okay, so industrialization. What does it even mean? Well, the first is, of course, technological innovation. At its very base, what industrialization means is you are now transitioning away from hand-producing goods one at a time to mass-producing goods using machines. And so industrialization is going to start with the expansion of, or the invention of, and then expansion of the use of machines to make life easier. The first industry to experience this is, of course, the textile industry, where you see things like the spinning jenny being one piece of what eventually would become the power loom, as you see machines now doing the spinning and weaving process of making textiles in which to sell and turn into clothing. You then have, as a way of trying to figure out, how do we pump the water out of those coal mines so we can get more coal out of the ground? You see the invention of the steam engine by James Watt, whose invention is then going to be expanded out to other things. This is the first time you see the engine, and of course it uses steam, which is no longer going to require it requires water, but it's going to be more the heating up of water rather than the flowing of water or animal. In addition, you're going to see these machines now powered by fossil fuels, which is really nifty because the British especially had gone through an energy crisis as they had been using up much of their wood supply. Of course, Jack, just to keep going, the second industrial revolution is going to be yet another advancement where we're going to see not just the use of machines or the expansion of the steam engine, but now actually the development of the combustible engine. You're going to see cars, you're going to see steam ships, you're going to see planes, but you're also going to see new innovations in chemicals, new scientific advancements like vaccines, and in a sense, just an increase in the number of different types of innovations that occur. And the second industrial revolution will be unique because Germany will be the leader of it. Oh, there you go. Chemicals, electricity, and of course, steel, which is a big one. So just to understand, the steam engine by James Watt is going to be used, and especially in the early industrial revolution, the railroad. If there's one invention that really defines industrialization, it's going to be the massive increase in the number of rails in the first half of the 19th century. However, in the second half of the 19th century, by 1914, it is the invention of the light bulb and electricity that is going to dramatically change and define industrialization in Europe. And this is where you see the creation of what are called modern cities, as places like Paris become the city of lights and romance and chocolate and kisses and Eiffel Towers and mushy gushy stuff.
City of Eiffel Tower. You think there's another city that like is looking over?
Yeah, Chicago, because the United States beat out the French
What,
when
Vegas?
they created the spinning wheel, or the Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel said, oh, you've got one
It's
part
not
of your
Eiffel
building.
Tower,
It
though.
is, and that was what beat it. You're right, Anna. You're not invited if you can't agree with me. Ladies and gentlemen, here. So what are the effects of industrialization? One is going to be the change of labor techniques. Now, I kind of talked about what the cottage system was earlier. The cottage system, as individual women were owning the means of production, owning those power looms, or excuse me, not those power looms, those spinning wheels, and spinning and weaving cloth in their home and selling them piecemeal, one at a time. What you then see is instead of individual women owning the means of production, what business owners are going to do is buy a bunch of machines. And instead of people working in the home, they will now leave the home and work in factories. And they're no longer going to be earning a living based off of what they produce. They're earning a living based on just being there and pushing buttons. That's labor. So that's being paid for your work as opposed to being paid for what you produce. The odd thing is we are now actually experiencing, as a part of, I guess, the fourth industrial revolution, we're seeing actually a reversion back to that, where individuals are now being paid more so by what they're able to produce. It's more project-based rather than what they are able to, or when they're just showing up to work, clocking in and clocking out. And that's where you see Google and other startups are doing that. Good. And then the means of production, which is kind of what I just talked about, is not owned by the worker. And labor is now going to go from being skilled to largely being unskilled, particularly for women and for children, but especially as we go, even with men, it's going to be more of an unskilled labor force. Of course, another huge thing is going to be the growth and rapid growth, of course, of cities. As cities are now going to spring up, number one, cities that were already there are going to rapidly expand. As individuals are going to move to these cities, particularly as factories are being built on the outskirts, and people and cities are going to rapidly grow as shoddy housing businesses. Businesses are going to have rapid, shoddy housing developments that are going to be along those rivers. But also new cities are going to develop and literally pop up out of nowhere. Manchester, the place that now has 2 soccer teams, it was a city that was barely anything in the first half of the 19th century, will now grow to be one of the most wealthy and prosperous cities in all of England. Of course, with rapid expansion means that these cities are largely going to be poorly planned. And also, the medieval infrastructure in these cities had no ability to hold the capacity in which it had grown to. And so therefore, you have incredibly terrible sanitation conditions. And of course, with that comes the spread of disease. My favorite, cholera, because it's death by pooping. You literally die by pooping everything that you eat until you die of dehydration and you look like a blue skull. Because it's just funny to think about the fact that you're just poop all the time. And what high school student doesn't think it's kind of funny to talk about poop? Yeah, that's fine. You're holding it in right now, Emma. I know you are. But when I say poop inside, you're giggling. You also see the innovations of transportation and really the ease of transportation as well. And this is where it becomes really popular to take day trips or weekend trips down to the seashore or to the countryside in order to get away from the filthy stink of the cities. Also, steamships are going to make other migrations possible. Okay, so the impacts of industrialization. So, ladies and gentlemen, just to understand, what are some of those impacts? So, while industrialization largely happens without government interference in Britain and in the United States, it is largely going to be state-run in almost every other place. So, mainland Europe, including France and Germany and other places, it's going to be initiated by the state and encouraged by the state. And the state is going to do its best to protect those industries as well. This is also going to be seen as we look at the Meiji Restoration in Japan. As Japan's industrialization is going to start by the efforts of the Meiji, or enlightened emperor of Japan, who wants to now quickly modernize in order to resist Western pressure. Economically, you're going to see incredible wealth developing for the middle class. Now, does that mean the aristocracy loses wealth? No, they're aristocrats. They're wealthy because they're always wealthy. And they're going to find ways in order to invest that money, both in business and in stocks and other things, and they will maintain their superiority. But we do see the middle class not only expanding, but beginning to challenge the authority of the upper class as well. And unfortunately, the aristocracy in some places are forced to work, which is actually the opposite of definition of what a nobility was. Especially in the early modern era, they would grow out their fingernails just to show how little they had to work. The whiter you were, or the more you looked like you stayed inside all day, all night playing Fortnite, was actually the cooler you were, which is why they had powdered wigs and powdered their faces or makeup. Like literally, the whiter you were, and the more you looked like you did not do anything in life, the cooler you were. Which unfortunately is also starting to happen anyway. Good. But for the majority of people, and for the individuals that we are now going to call the working class, formerly known as peasants, the working class, they are going to be kept in extreme poverty. What you see, somewhat poverty. What you are going to see is not necessarily the fact that the poor are going to get poorer and the rich get richer, but what you're going to see is the rich are going to get richer at a rapid rate. But those who are poor are just going to get somewhat more richer at a much slower rate. So you see the gap between rich and poor increasing dramatically during industrialization. So that's one of the major economic things. And this is largely also around poor working conditions for the working class as individuals. And part of the Sadler Commission is literally a testimony of a doctor who said as he was observing people walk out, people's faces were sunken in, their skin was yellow, their hair was falling out, they were hunched back over because of the terrible conditions in the mines in England and in the factories. Yes? They continued to work in the church and tried really hard to make Christianity stay as relevant as possible. But largely, they okay. Especially since many states are actually using, as part of nationalism, their connection to that religion. That's a good question. Culturally, middle-class values become dominant. Values of respectability. And one is respectable in a few things. Number one, you work hard. You work your butt off. You work super hard. You pick yourself up off your own bootstraps, and through your own ingenuity and just spunk and chutzpah, you are then successful. Number two, how do you know that you are hardworking? Well, you got to look the part, right? So you have to be clean and respectable. You have to wear your suit and your top hat and walk with your cane and your fancy hipster shoes. And you need to make sure that you display the wealth that you have in your home. You have to make sure that you begin to in your urban apartment home. How bougie! In your urban apartment home, you should have fancy furniture. You should have a piano. You should have all the decorations that the wealthy have, just on a slightly smaller scale. And you should make sure that you entertain in that home. Of course, part of middle class values is keeping women in the home. Women are responsible for the moral betterment of the children, and that's called the cult of domesticity. So that is part of that as well. Oh, middle class values are going to be tied to Christianity because, again, you have to prove that you're respectable, so you better sing loudly in church. And that's why you sit in the front so everybody can see you. You've got your top hat on so nobody can see the priest. Anyway, you then also have the ideas that are going to challenge bourgeois society, and that's going to be socialism, particularly those utopian socialists who imagine this perfect world where everybody gets along and sings Kumbaya, which then becomes more radicalized under the ideas of Karl Marx, who believes, yes, we'll have that Kumbaya world, but not until we kill the rich. Take all of their stuff, centralize it under a dictatorship of the proletariat, and then we can sing happily ever after and Kumbaya and enjoy each other's company. And then, of course, nationalism is going to be part of that as well. And then socially, this idea of class consciousness. This idea that, hey, I'm part of the middle class, baby, yeah! And of course, the middle class is going to be something that's extremely complex because there is an upper middle class, a middle class, and a lower middle class, otherwise known as the petty bourgeoisie, largely because they never let things go. But the petty bourgeoisie are going to be those clerks, those secretaries, those assistants, those pesky teachers. And the petty bourgeoisie are even going to see themselves as a distinct identity. And as I was listening to lectures, because that's what I do, as I was listening to lectures, one of the things that historians find hysterical is the petty bourgeoisie actually had an international convention. You walk up with your little pin that says, I'm a member of the petty bourgeoisie, because that's a badge of honor. Well, I don't know. At least they thought so. The working class is also going to develop this somewhat, largely because of the spread of the ideas of Marxism. Marx and Engels and communists and socialists are going to try to build that working class consciousness so that they could try and build popular support for their movement. Now, it's important to understand that by 1914, nationalism wins over class. So while people see themselves as distinct classes, they are going to see themselves as French first, or English, or Irish, which wouldn't be very popular in a lot of places other than Ireland. Even Ireland, maybe not that popular. So responses to modernization, because we also know that this is not European history. What we're studying is the world. And what we have to understand is that Europe, as it modernizes, is now going to look outward for access to new resources, to cheap labor, and for new markets to sell to. So they are going to begin to knock on the door of places outside of themselves. And where we see this is going to be some success in the response to modernization, where you're going to see Japan, that will go from a very traditional and isolated place as Chandler Bing decides to sail over to Tokyo and perform, Matthew Perry, is going to sail over to Tokyo, do military exercises outside of the capital in order to flex the military might of the American Navy and therefore scare the Tokugawa shogunate. The shogunate realizes, oh shoot, we need to do something. Then they get overthrown. And you wind up seeing the restoration of the emperor by a group of samurai, who then themselves wind up getting kicked out and changed. Anyway, but you see the Meiji Restoration, which will be a state-run industrialization process and modernization process that is going to become extremely successful and propel Japan to be a dominant global world power with their own colonies and with their own industrial might, even beating the Russians. First time an Asian power did that. We're not there yet. That's postmodern. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, the failure is what we're going to mostly see. And there are two places that we see that happening. Are two places that try their absolute darndest in order to industrialize, and that is China and the Ottoman Empire. Remember, in the early modern era, China and Islam, and the Ottoman Empire and Safavid, are going to be incredibly wealthy, powerful empires. But in the face of European modernization, they're not able to catch up. And what they do is too little, too late. They will also try a process of state-run industrialization, but it will fail in both places. In the Ottoman Empire, it's the Tanzimat reforms, and in China, it's self-strengthening. Which is going to be again that state-run industrialization program. Now, both of these are going to, and I don't know if I have it in my slides, so let's see what happens. Yeah, there we go. What happens because of this? Well, one thing is going to be the social shifts. Again, anytime you see industrialization, you're going to see a shift in the social classes. And you're going to see a pushback in both China and the Ottoman Empire from the traditional elites. In China, it's going to be the Confucian scholars who are going to say, we don't need the West. In addition, you're also going to see a conservative pushback from the peasantry, who had already had a history of trying to stop those pesky Jesuits from trying to spread Christianity. That is, of course, going to be the coolest club on campus. All of you know it as the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. That's got to be one of the coolest sweatshirts ever. To just walk around with it. It could be like a pin. You can put it on like the denim jackets and just like have them around. Right? So the Righteous and Harmonious Fist, or otherwise known as the Boxer Rebellion. In addition, you're also going to see in China a little pushback from the wealthy aristocratic landlords, especially since after the Taiping uprising, they have no reason to listen to the Qing dynasty because according to them, the Qing dynasty has already lost the mandate of heaven. In the Ottoman Empire, you're going to see a pushback from the Janissaries. Give me a second. From the Janissaries, and then not enough from groups called the Young Turks. Young Turks! And Young Ottomans. Yes. Well, it was a guy who claimed to be the brother of Jesus. So I wouldn't say Christian, but do they believe in Christ? I guess. But it's more so a kind of a Christian cultish sort of movement. Really, it stems from peasants being upset at their wealthy landlords and tired of the Qing dynasty being unable to maintain its own. The Taiping is going to be before modernization, so it doesn't happen yet. What I'm saying is you're going to see pushback from some wealthy landlords too, who are like, we don't need this. We have everything we need. And that's because they don't want to listen to the Qing. Some did. Some thought it was very beneficial, which is why you see kind of a growth of Westernization, and especially incorporation of Western education. But many are also going to fight against it. Max. These are good questions. I hope you're listening. Say it again. For modernization?
Yeah.
For modernization, you're going to see, especially those who are Western educated, those who are going to be sent over to Western education, Western universities, who are going to make sure that thing gets thrown out into the garbage. Thank you. Most of those, you can do it now. Most of those who are that one. Hey, airplane, throw it away. Patrick, throw it away. I saw you toss it. Don't just look at me blankly. Don't toss it in. Walk it over and dunk it into the trash can, and then do it over there. Okay. So anyway, you are going to see some educated, especially who are going to do that, particularly those who are going to be educated, but maybe not at the highest of ranks, and those who don't feel like it will threaten their position. Both Confucian scholars and also the Boxers as well.
Were the Young Turks like educated middle class people, or they more?
They're gonna be educated elites, so probably those who would have already been educated, but they'll also be educated in Western universities. They're gonna be sent over from the Ottoman, but they're not gonna be necessarily members of the Janissaries or things like, or if they are, it's very little of them. Yeah. Young Ottomans were first. They failed, and they didn't go far enough. The Young Turks wanted a militantly secular state, Islam in the home, but they want this stuff to happen in Turkey. And that's going to be led by Ataturk. We'll get to him next week in the postmodern era because of his playboy lifestyle and love of dancing, which is not the answer to the quiz question. Which some people who are taking it now just realized I just gave an answer to the quiz question for next week, or for tomorrow, or no, Wednesday, but others didn't realize I just gave that answer. So, nice. So, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, good, we're going to keep going. Of course you're going to see political upheaval because it is the failure of modernization. It is the failure of modernization that is going to cause both the end of the Ottoman Empire and the last Qing emperor to be deposed, and the creation of a Chinese democracy in 1911. So both are not going to survive the failures of modernization, and so you see new governments being implemented largely along Western values and traditions. And then in some senses, at least a partial rejection of traditional culture. In the Ottoman Empire, you're going to see Islam being relegated to the home, being more of a private, and really the break from church and state, which has been so foundational in Islam since its inception. And then in China, while you're not going to see the throwing out of traditional Confucian values, you will see Western culture pouring in particularly. And then let's not forget that shortly after the Nationalist Revolution, you see a civil war between nationalists and communists developing, and more on that probably next week. So imperialism is the next thing, because while China, the Ottoman Empire, and Japan are able to respond on their own terms to Europe, it's also many places around the world who are unable to handle the brute force of the Europeans when they come knocking on their door. And so imperialism is an impact of industrialization. I think it's really funny that I have Oceania up there as not something that was coming in. But anyway, we see this as a new imperialism. It's also known as the second wave of colonization, because Europeans had already colonized some places during the early modern era. I mean, shoot, the Greeks even colonized places in France in the classical era, so colonization is nothing new. Question? We can. I would like to finish this, since I've already started it, but I appreciate your request. So as we go through with new imperialism, we do see it's something different for Europeans. And how so? Well, instead of just using only brute force, there are new tactics that are employed. Particularly, the Europeans are going to be negotiating with many different powers, both in India and in Africa, and using contracts in order to extend their influence. Now, it's really easy to have somebody sign a contract when outside of the tent you have a Gatling gun that they do not have. And so let's not be clear that they are still using force. And Europeans are largely doing this without any sort of actual plan. There's no military conquest that is organized. It's simply just haphazardly happening as they go. We do see this happening in Africa. Of course, you have the scramble for Africa, particularly in the late 19th century, as European powers are trying to compete with England and trying to grab as much as they possibly can from African soils. You then have Asian domination, which I didn't really talk about much. But after the Opium Wars in China, Europe is going to largely carve up different spheres of influence in that territory, which isn't controlled politically, but does mean that they have control economically. And so you do see that happening in places in Asia, particularly East Asia. Oh, good. There you go. Good. And in the Ottoman Empire, the way that looks is called capitulation agreements, where European merchants were allowed to essentially break Ottoman law and not get in trouble. And then in India and South Asia, you see the British East India Company that will largely through negotiations and actually pitting one side against the other, Mughal versus Hindu princes, will begin to extend their influence as well. And largely this is a process of both direct and indirect control. As Europeans are sometimes going to directly control, which means they are going to send officials to rule over, to set up a government, and to administer that government themselves. In most places, what you'll see is indirect control, where they will use natives and locals in order to administer a majority of the things in government. A perfect example in India would be the use of the sepoys, or Indian soldiers who are Indian soldiers who are working for the British East India Company and eventually the British government. So what are the impacts of imperialism? What happens to these different colonies as they now get incorporated into Europe's economic system and largely given a bigger space into the economic system of the world? Well, the first is the development of single crops colonies. Some colonies are going to specialize in one single crop based off of what Europe needs. A great example of that is Belgium, where King Leopold II's a private company was largely trying to harvest rubber in order to use for bicycles and for cars. And in order to do that, he needed more and more production. So he's going to use a coercive labor system, as he is going to have people's hands chopped off, as you see this guy holding somebody else's hand that they've just chopped off, in order to incentivize those who are working. And so there will be some coerced things. But other places are going to be using cotton, mining metals. India is going to produce whatever Europe wants. Is it opium for China? Is it indigo? Is it cotton? What do the British need? And that's what India is going to produce. You're going to see the decline of agriculture in some places, but not in a lot of places. In fact, when I say the decline of agriculture, I should say the decline of subsistence agriculture. Agriculture for yourself in order for your own family to survive. That is going to decline. You will see in many places the creation of a Western-educated elite class. As Europeans go and take over, those who are traditional elites are going to be given all of the benefits of industrialization. And that will come to bite the Europeans in the butt when we get to the postmodern era, because it's going to be those Western-educated elite who are going to then start independence movements. We do see poverty for many, particularly as Europe finds cheaper resources elsewhere, particularly if you're producing one single crop. Once the Europeans don't need that, your economy will quite literally crash. And then lastly, and something that I don't really cover a whole lot in this class, is there are migrations that occur from different places around the world. Some notable examples of that is there's actually a fairly heavy amount of Japanese people who migrate to Brazil to work after the Meiji Restoration. Another one is Indians are going to work in South Africa in the diamond mines and in other factories in South Africa. And so you're going to see people moving around the world with easier transportation in order to find work. And being a part of a larger empire like the British Empire will allow that to be an easier transition for you. Oh, good. Well, let's not worry about what it says for periodization. Let's just modify these. So let's do some essay work as Jake is 100% correct. So let me modify this. Ooh. Let's do the first one because I like it. Now, don't worry about what periodization, because that is something that was last year that the College Board changed. But we're just going to do, we'll just do this first one here. Whoa. As we look at it. So, first thing when you get an essay prompt, what you want to do is you want to make sure you understand what the prompt is. Now, first things first you see is analyze the extent. What does that mean? Epex, and then somewhat or mostly. Good. Keep going. What do we break down in Epex? Good. What's the, and you guys love it when I say this, what's the trigger word? No. How do we know what type of essay this is? Change. Change is the trigger word, which means it is what type of essay? It's a CCOT. And if we see it saying analyze the extent to which something changed, we want to know, did it mostly change? And somewhat stay the same? That was. Or does it somewhat change and mostly stay the same? Does that make sense? Thank you, Sophia. Yes. Good. You got 5 minutes to brainstorm. Go. That's why I'm not worried about it. Okay, give me a second. South Asia. This is after the 1857. British director. Queen Victoria becomes the empress. 2, 1. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's end this strongly. So, yeah, that's not a word, or it doesn't make sense. But we're gonna end this well. So before we get going, because I know it is basically time, I want to say this. I know, and I've seen this the last 3 days, and so it's something that I want you to be okay with. I know it's hard to brainstorm evidence, but remember, the idea is you're not going to be able to remember everything, but think how you can use it. Because when I say analyze the extent to which imperial control marked a change for South Asia, you want to think of things like, well, what were the effects of imperialism? So you think, okay, do I see the creation of a new Western elite? Do I see the decline of subsistence agriculture? Do I see single crop economies? Well, maybe. Do I see migrations? Like, these are things that you want to start thinking about. Now, in 1857, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the Indian Rebellion, otherwise known as the Sepoy Mutiny. What the Sepoy Mutiny's effects were is that Queen Victoria, Queen Vic, becomes the Empress of India. What she sends is a viceroy, or essentially a governor, from England to rule over India directly. In addition, you also see, I did not order pizza. Maybe check the band room, I'm not sure. What'd they say? Is there a room? Try the library. Maybe there's a group in there. Yeah, you're welcome. I was about to get real mad at somebody, because not during a review session. Ladies and gentlemen, hold on. Fine. If you gotta go, go. If you gotta go, go. But if you want to keep talking about this, we can do this. I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, if you have commitments, by all means, it's your time. I respect that. So, but here's how I keep brainstorming this. A viceroy. India is even given a member of parliament who, yes, might sometimes be an Indian, but sometimes might be a British person. What these are all evidence points for is that you see a change. Now, I'm not going to say somewhat or mostly, but you see the British taking more direct control over India. Or, in other words, for those of you that did a DBQ in class the other day, you see native Indians being excluded from high government positions. Does that make sense? Now, you're not expected to remember every little thing. But if you can remember things like the Indian Rebellion, and the fact that that sparked more direct control, and that Queen Victoria becomes the Empress, that there's a viceroy, that we have a member of parliament, you can start to do that. If you can't remember that, but you remember somebody like Gandhi, you can say, hey, one of the things Gandhi complained about, and he would be an evidence point, one of the things Gandhi complained about is Indians weren't given control over their own territory. Does that make sense? You can even start to say, technologically, India becomes the 4th largest railroad. The British, in order to maintain effective control, are going to bring in a telegraph system. You also know that in order for the British to get there, they're going to travel on steamships. What I'm trying to model for you is just, it doesn't have to be like something that, some specific, completely thing that only happened in South Asia. It can be something general from the time period. Does that make sense? So, what I would do, and I really encourage you to do this, go home and practice. If you yourself 10 minutes. See if you can brainstorm and come up with a thesis. Does that make sense? Cool. Have a great evening.
We do something like that in class, except like we could do it from the time period, and then like we have to write a whole